Hello, everybody. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Chris Norris. Chris is the Director of International Training for Wicklander, Zalosky and Associates. He is a certified forensic interviewer with over 35 years of investigative experience. He has trained thousands of investigators across 6 continents. In transparency, he's also a former teammate and friend of mine, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with him, especially with his international experience. We're going to talk a lot about building honest rapport, creating subject autonomy, giving people the sense and feeling of control during our conversations, especially when we need them to open up and tell us the truth. We're going to do some examples and talk about the importance of having a great game plan. And he is going to share something he has learned along the way about how he has adapted once understanding that accountability is a vulnerable process. And we're going to kick the conversation off by talking about an investigation that he and I worked together back in the day. He was the lead interrogator, and he did a tremendous job getting a large confession from somebody who he was told up front probably wasn't going to be open to telling the truth. He did a great job, and I'm really excited to dive into that with you right with the start of the conversation. So thank you all for being here today. We appreciate you coming back. Please, while you're here, take just a second, like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show. We certainly appreciate it. And after the show, take a second, look at the show notes and check out our sponsors. You have humantel.com. That's where you can go to learn how to recognize not just changing facial expressions and shifts in body language, but the emotional changes they likely are indicative of. The code Inclusive25 will get you 25% off the training. For the professional interviewers listening, if you haven't already, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can learn more about not just what you can get from the association, but what you can give to the International Association of Interviewers, how you can contribute. It is also where you can learn more about the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And of course, you could please head over to Inclusive.com. That's where you will learn more about the programs our clients ask us to facilitate for their senior leaders, sales team, and HR teams to teach them how to unlock the truth in all of their high-value conversations. We appreciate you coming back week after week. Thank you. So let's get right to it. Without further ado, I introduce to you, Chris Norris. What's up, brother? It is so great to see you. How are you?
I am doing great, Mike. Man, it's really good to see you. It was great to catch up recently at the conference, and appreciate you having me on today. It's great catching up with you anytime I get the opportunity.
Oh, dude, my pleasure. We went way too long without seeing each other or talking. So to see each other a couple months ago, have the opportunity to talk now, especially around your crazy travel schedule, I really appreciate you being here. And we were talking a little bit before we hit record about all the directions we could take this conversation. We'll get to as many of them as we can. But for me, we used to work together. We used to teach together. Like literally, there were plenty of times we were on the road together. Yeah. Some of those stories we should probably not tell on a recorded conversation. But one of my favorite cases to teach back when I taught interrogation was an expense fraud case that you worked on.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to lie, depending on who I'm talking to, I might take a little extra credit for some of the preparation work we did in the hotel the night before. I got audiences to entertain, but it was your case and you did a great job with it. And there was some surprising and educational nuances for how you built the relationship necessary to encourage a seasoned executive to provide you with a detailed, pretty substantial confession. So to start this off, I think a great place to start would be that case. And you can take it from whatever you want. And you know the details that we're talking about. But if you could kind of walk us through how you talked with this guy to arrive at some of the surprising things that you were told and that happened in that conversation, I think that would be an educational and entertaining place for us to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. It is a good case. It still has, even though it's many years ago, it still has some great teaching points that I even apply when I'm working with various groups. The case, the simple background of the case is a company that I had done some work with in the past and that had done some investigations with had contacted me about some concerns with a senior vice president of sales to their company. And that there was concerns that there could be elements of fraud. They were concerned with his expense travel vouchers. They looked at it and say, the audit has revealed a problem. There might be a reasonable explanation. However, we're really concerned with fraud. Could you come in and have the conversation? Ultimately, what they said to me was, we don't want to screw this up, right? We would rather have you come in and have the conversation, particularly if there is fraud that we have to deal with. Could you come in and do so? And I did. And I do remember one of the things that was interesting for you and I actually collaborating on this case. I'd flown up and met with the client, sat down with them, reviewed their audit, took on their concerns, and started to outline kind of a plan. And we met because you were working out somewhere. You had flown in. So we met near the airport. I remember doing that and grabbing a pizza and grabbing a pitcher of beer. We had the Thursday night football game on where we sat down, and I took my stuff out and went, okay, I got this case tomorrow. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? So I think one of the first lessons we can always learn about preparing any conversation, whether it is, an investigative interview, sitting down with the subject, preparing a difficult conversation with your boss, sometimes a difficult conversation with a family member, collaboration can be very, very valuable to you. It's actually sit down and think it through, right? And think, the old, Herm Edwards thing, right? Don't press in. Think first, maybe collaborate, take the time and slow down. And so I do remember, sitting with you at Giordano's and having a pizza, having a beer and going, what do you think? What do you think? And kind of working through and preparing our strategy that evening and taking everything into account of what I had in mind, some things you had in mind. The next thing you know, we have a great plan that's put together. I think one of the things going into it too, that I ultimately had to prepare for as they gave me their concerns about the issue. One of the first questions, of course, we should always be asking anytime you're preparing an interview like this or this type of conversation is, what can you tell me about the person? So they gave me essential, points and a bit of a profile of who am I about to engage here. And as a senior VP of sales, he was also a 30 plus year employee. He was also a board member. So there was a lot of gravity to this conversation, particularly if it went the path that they were concerned with. But sitting down and having the conversation with them and getting prepared for not only what is the issue that we have to address, but who's the individual that I'm going to engage here. One of the first things they said to me was, being senior vice president of sales, he's a typical sales guy. And quite frankly, as they said, their words, he's going to be a pain in the ass. And what they said is he will be a typical sales guy. He is going to want the last word. He's going to have a joke for everything. He will be the guy that will look at you and say, if you think I did something, prove it, show it to me. I'm not saying anything to you. And that's the one of the things that I also had to prepare for, that you and I sat down and went through and said, how do we create connections with this individual? How do we ease into this topic? Because we know if we come in a little heavy-handed, we come in a little aggressive or confrontational in any way, that's going to invite this typical sales guy monster that, who we could possibly encounter here. The conversation went completely different. And there were a number of things that took place during the conversation as this layered through. One of the things that always comes into mind and what we teach and what I think I'm a big advocate to, and I've always been, is the importance and the value of rapport building. And sitting down and being able to develop rapport with them actually went much smoother than I thought. And one of the things that I see, and I don't know if this is your experience too, Mike, particularly when teaching investigative interview, but when you talk about the importance or value of rapport strategically, I don't think it's covered enough. We talk about why it might be important or the benefits of creating the relationship, but actually sitting down and talking through strategies of how to create those relationships. I think one of the things that I kind of put focus to when it comes to teaching rapport is in that context, I'm sitting down and trying to create a relationship with him when, quite frankly, he has no interest in having a relationship with me. And those are the challenges that we face with the difficult conversations that we have, is trying to create a relationship, if we don't already have one, with someone that doesn't want it. And so strategically, I see people making a lot of different mistakes, through the process of rapport building. But being able to go down and sit down and have that conversation, create the relationships through what we would kind of talk about in terms of subject autonomy, giving them options, giving them the choices, let them guide this portion of the conversation. I was able to create the relationship, create that rapport, have a nice, friendly conversation, create some connections over some common and shared interest, and then ease into the conversations. I think one of the biggest teaching points that comes out of this is from behavior perspectives. We're too often focused on behavior, what this might mean, and kind of generalizing what behavior analysis practices are. Which, when we approach from a general perspective, it's quite easy to be inaccurate or misinterpret certain things that might be happening. But during the course of the conversation, as we start to ease through, him starting to now volunteer and providing some information related to the fact that there was fraud, and he acknowledges that there's fraud. There's kind of a tipping point to the conversation where he's willing to acknowledge a couple minor things, very, very minor things. But there becomes a tipping point when he looks at me and says, "I feel like I can trust you." And in that moment, we now know the relationship is in fact solid, and I know that he is about to open up to me. Now, when he says that to me, what's funny is right before that, he had looked at me and said, "You want to know the truth?" Which, of course, I smile and go, "Yeah, that's kind of why I'm here. Yeah, that'll be great." But he said, "You want to know the truth?" Yeah, of course I do. That's what I'd like to talk about today, to make sure we're covering accurate information. And then he says, "I feel like I can trust you." And of course, I smile and say, "I appreciate that." And he has a pause. He has a heavy sigh, and he says, "Floodgates, gates open up." And I think what's important from a teaching moment here about having that relationship, the importance of empathy and being non-judgmental, and all the things that create a good open line of communication, both ways, kind of fits into a quote that I ran into recently. And that quote is, "Accountability is a vulnerable process." There comes a point within the conversation where he is willing now, he's teetering anyway, and willing to become accountable. Do you want to know the truth? He's taking that step with me. But in order to take that step, if that quote is accurate, and it really resonated with me, but if that quote is accurate, that accountability is a vulnerable process, he has to be vulnerable, but who's he going to be vulnerable with but someone that he trusts? And that kind of opened those floodgates to say, here's what I've been doing. And it took actually that case, the information that they'd come to me with and what their concerns were related to a reasonable amount. It wasn't, anything crazy, but a reasonable amount of, concern related to fraud to a much bigger, broader scoped admission acknowledgement. He actually went through a forensic audit to help prove everything, so that we were able to validate everything that he was saying was in fact accurate. But there's a number of different teaching points that come along with a conversation like that. And it can start from the beginning, the importance of prep, the importance of actually strategically creating rapport, reflecting empathy, avoiding confrontation, easing into things to put someone into a point where there's a willingness to be vulnerable and a willingness to be accountable. And it's getting accurate information. But that, I'm curious to see what teaching points you had, considering, when I watch the video, sometimes for me, it's like, oh man, I missed that. Or man, I sound like that. I can't, whatever. But yeah. I'm really curious to see some of the teaching points that you had from it.
Yeah, watching our own videos in front of a group of people is always the worst, regardless of what the outcome is. It's always the worst. Real quick, because I don't think I caught it. After he said, "I'll tell you the truth," or "Do you want to hear the truth?" Then he gave you that big exhale. What were the first words that he said?
Been doing it for 10 years.
10 years. That's what it was. I've been doing it for 10 years. So he comes right out of the gate with a decade confession. I guess it's an admission at that point because you don't have all the details, whatever. But he essentially just looks you in the face and says, yes, I've been committing fraud for 10 years, which of course it turns out to be more, but that was a good place to start. So, of course, when I teach it, I'm the hero in the story, right? So it's my preparation that made the whole, I'm kidding. That's not the case at all. But I do think there are some really important little lessons. And you did some little things in that conversation that really stood out to me. So the preparation was a big one. And when I used to teach that case, I would give the same details that you just gave. So senior VP, 30 years of experience, international clients that he's responsible for. I think he had left the company and they brought him back. So he got even more money and he was essentially unsupervised. He was on the board, all these things, typical sales guy, blah, blah, blah. Now, all those things are true. Like we're embellishing zero. But when people hear that, they're like, oh, this is going to be a fight. This is going to be awesome. It's going to be this back and forth, really dramatic video. And then I would talk about how we prepared and we show the video, and inevitably after the video, and it's a multiple 6-figure documented confession at the end, people will be like, dude, you lied to me. None of the things that I expected were going to happen happened. I said, you're wrong and right. I didn't lie to you about a thing. But the reason why none of those things happened was because of Chris's preparation. Like we literally sat down with the subject profile and said, okay, how do we build credibility with this person in a way that allows them to save face, have that subject autonomy, and choose to be honest with us without all this other bullshit happening along the way? So the depth and level of preparation stopped any of those things for flaring up. So that was great, number one. And you talked about building rapport, and something really slick that I saw you do when you built rapport in that conversation is something that I've seen a lot of other people trip up on. Building rapport with somebody doesn't mean we have to be exactly the same. And often the more we try to act like we are the same, or the longer we drag rapport on, the more it backfires on us. So I'm not going to remember the words specifically, but he was talking about, he likes working in the garden and he has like a vineyard. He likes wine or something.
Yeah.
And so as soon as he's done talking about wine, you look at him and you're like, that's really cool, man. I'm more of a beer guy. And then you start talking about beer and different things that you've sampled and stuff that you've done. So you found that common ground around having your preferred beverages. And it's not just the beverage, just the process and everything else that goes around it. But you didn't mirror him. Like you didn't lie. You were like, oh, dude, I'm a wine guy too. As a matter of fact, like you could have 86'd yourself right there. So I thought that was
not really a sommelier. I will go on record by saying I am not a sommelier. So you are correct. Yeah, I would have failed miserably if I had put on that facade.
More importantly, you can judge a great Guinness, and that's really all that matters.
Right.
I have firsthand experience.
Yes.
So I thought the rapport building piece was great. Then the overall execution of the technique, everything that you talked about was great. Walking him down the line. He never really objected, but he tested you a few times and you handled all those tests really well. Calm, like it was no big deal. Like, yeah, sure, whatever, dude. And then for me, the point that I used to sarcastically enjoy teaching is you talk about that big exhale, but right before he does that, he crosses his arms. Now, what most people don't see is when he crosses his arms, he takes his foot out from behind his chair, puts both feet flat on the floor and points them at you, looks down, has a big sigh, squares his shoulders, looks right at you. Like however many behaviors, 9 out of 10 behaviors say I'm ready to talk, but he crosses his arms because he's, to use your words, he's emotionally vulnerable at that point in time. And I used to keep my finger on the pause button because invariably someone would be like, oh, he crossed his arms, you lost him. And because, well, you taught me how to teach in many ways, I would look at him and say, do you have your wallet on you? Would you like to make a wager on what happens next? And it was a great teaching point to get away from some of the things you just referenced, these stereotypes around behaviors and reading the totality of what we see and looking for on-time clusters as opposed to one behavior and all those things. And then how you walked him through was just fantastic. And didn't he say something else too when he wrote his statement? Wasn't there, like, didn't he thank you? Or he said something, and now I'm putting you on the spot. I know it's a long case.
Yeah.
But there was a little clip when he was done writing down 10 plus years of 6 figures of fraud that he said something pretty cool to you then too.
Yeah, one of the other things that he did say at the conclusion of the conversation, so he hand wrote out his, I'm sorry, you guys are like family. I feel awful that I let you down. Please let me pay it back. And, he felt awful with everything. Now, one of the things that had happened at that point is I said, hey, John, I'm going to, head downstairs and check in with let him know how our conversation's going and everything. But what ended up happening is I said, are you going to be okay sitting here by yourself? Yeah, sure, no problem. Is he actually extended his hand to me. And I didn't initiate the handshake. He did. He extended his hand to me. And what he ended up saying to me was, I appreciate how, how you handled this today. And of course, I just smiled and said, I'm just having a conversation, John. And he said, no, 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 no. And as he's shaking my hand, said, I appreciate how you didn't judge me. You made it easy to be honest with you today, and I appreciate how you handled this situation with me. So there's this, there's a humbling moment in that, because it could be very easy to sit down and throw a bunch of evidence on the table and say, hey, explain these things to me. But tactically, that's just not the way to handle a difficult conversation like this. Again, I'm going to go back to that quote that just resonated with me. If I want him to be accountable, I have to understand the vulnerability that might go through that. So what do I need to do? Is I need to kind of walk that path with him rather than, drive him or lead him down this path. Let's walk side by side. And one of the things that, you mentioned, there were times that he was never challenging at all. From a difficult perspective, there were certainly things, as you mentioned, that he sort of tested me on. Well, I'm not sure if I remember that, and I, it might have been, so there was some hesitation in early stages. But once again, I was not argumentative. I took the conversation on. I continued to, build it with a simple relationship and acknowledge. I know it's not easy to talk about, kind of always enforcing some forms of empathy to keep the conversation moving forward. And while I was prepared for the worst, when you and I sat down to kind of go through everything of, well, what are we going to do? How do we strategize this? What do we do for credibility? What about empathy? How do we strategize the conversation? What are the things we need to consider in all of this? As you say, he turned out to be the complete opposite of what we were anticipating because of the way we took him down a path.
Yeah, it's all because of your approach. You didn't have a game plan for that. He wasn't expecting that. So now it's, oh, wait, I've got to pay attention. I've got to listen. This feels different. I'm not being attacked. I'm not being judged. Why haven't they shown me any evidence? Wait, this guy seems a little bit too, wait, you mean other people? So you did a masterful job with that conversation. As much as it pains me to compliment my friends publicly, you did a masterful job with that whole thing. And there's tons of great little nuances. And think about it. If a well-educated, seasoned executive who autonomously was basically committing fraud for 1/3 of his tenure with this organization and just threw it all away, his actions threw it away. It was thrown away long before he told you the truth. But it just given all of that up, for him to shake your hand and say, thank you for not judging me. Thank you for making it easy to tell me the truth. Imagine how powerful that type of approach now is for your employees, your customers, your spouse, your kids, everybody.
Yeah.
Withhold judgment, you want the truth, you got to make it easier for people to tell you the truth. Now, to wrap this up on a bit of a comic note, if I recall correctly, didn't you get a special guest visitor during that interrogation?
I did. I forgot about that one. Yeah. So a little bit more background on this. As a long-term employee, senior VP, he was actually, as you mentioned, he had left the company. He was actually now back in a consulting role. They put him on a retainer and some other things that were going on. His wife often volunteered or helped work around the office. She would often travel with him as well. That kind of thing. There was a point during the conversation, and it was, if I remember correctly, it was a point where he was at that sort of the apex of teetering, should I, shouldn't I, sort of thing, just giving you little bits. And suddenly the door opened and he turned to the door behind him. And you hear a woman's voice in the video say, oh, sorry, I didn't, and he says, hey, honey, and turns it back to me and says, yeah, that's my wife. She works here too. And in the middle of this challenging conversation, in the middle of him being vulnerable, his wife opened up that door and almost walked into the room completely. And so it could have gone sideways rather quickly, had she continued to walk in, or even just emotionally, if he would have snapped out of, sort of the either the rational or emotional state that he's going through at the moment. If he would have snapped out of that in any way, I would have had to take a big step backwards, but progress right through it again. Fortunately, it was not problematic. And I think one of the other things, there's probably a point in that, in terms of him turning around and going, oh, hey, honey, coming back to me and going, oh, yeah, that's my wife. She works here too. I didn't actually call any attention to it. Oh, great. And then just picked up where I had left off to keep the conversation moving forward, rather than having that sidetrack us, or rather than having, that moment, this brief 3-second, 5-second moment, actually make us take a step backward. I kept the conversation going. So I acknowledged it, but didn't actually bring it into the conversation. I was like, okay, great. And so, as I was saying a second ago, but yes, it could have happened. Who knows what could have happened? If again, that's a point where if it's handled incorrectly, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, part of me just always wants to laugh when I think about that. Like, imagine what their conversation was like after. Like, so honey, what was that about? Oh, it's funny you should ask. All this money that I've had, let me tell you where it came from. So I mean, but respectful to their family and their relationship, understand that we've all made regrettable decisions, not to the tune of his, thankfully, but we've all made regrettable decisions. But to your point, it's almost like when your kids go.
I was going to say, I have another part to the end of it that maybe you don't know. I don't know if I've ever shared this, or you realize this. So at the point when he was actually at his most vulnerable and saying, this is what I did, and I feel awful, and this is what's happening, and this is why I did it, he actually started to open up and provide a lot of detail, a lot of information. Again, he trusted me, right? There was a point when he had said, I've been lying to a lot of people. I've been lying to people that love me. I've been lying to people that I love. I feel awful. I feel terrible. I need to fix this. I've been carrying this around. I'm finally being honest with you. I'm being honest with myself. I need to be honest with them. And of course, I'm like, hey, John, that's pretty noble of you to recognize that. And, that's, and he goes, no. I need, my wife, she's a good woman. She's always been there for me. And I've been lying to her. I need to tell her the truth. And again, I said, hey, that's probably the right thing to do, John. Yeah. And, I admire you for recognizing that. And he looked at me and said, can I bring her in now? Do you mind if I bring her in now? Can I tell her now? Which, of course, at that point in the conversation, I was like, no, John. I do not want to be a part of that conversation. No. In fact, John, why don't you wait until you get home and have the conversation when you're at home, rather than doing it here at work? But yeah, I don't know if you're aware of that piece, but yeah, he had asked me if he could bring her in so he could be honest with her as well.
No, I do recall I feel bad. I've been lying to people but the ask to bring her in the room, you hadn't told me that piece. And I can just picture all the ways that breaks way bad. Like, right. This goes from 0 to Jerry Springer in about 35 seconds. And right. We don't need that. So well done, man. I mean, I still, depending on how it comes up, I think usually now working more on the business side, I'll reference that case in 2 ways. One, if someone's really talking about difficulty building trust with people, oh, you think you have a hard time building trust? Let me tell you a story that's representative of what we would do. But then also the preparation piece. Like, anytime I hear people talking about like bypassing preparation or just winging it doesn't matter. No, it absolutely matters, because you can take something that is almost a sure difficult situation and you can turn it into something neutral, if not positive, by having the right game plan. But taking the time to create that game plan is essential.
Yeah. I even bring up, in classes, I'll ask groups, and say, by show of hands, guys, how many of you have gone into what you thought was, a rather simple conversation because you have a mountain of evidence and whatever it happens to be, that you have the attitude, this will be a piece of cake and I'll be able to bang this conversation out in 20 minutes. And you end up 30 minutes later walking out of the office thinking, what the hell just happened, right? And then do the flip and say, how many of you have gone into conversations where you're dreading having the conversation because you know it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging, this guy's going to be quite difficult, and et cetera, et cetera. And you end up walking out 20 minutes later with a handshake, and you concluded with good result. You got full cooperation, everything. How many of you have been in those situations? And inevitably, almost everyone's raising their hand. Yeah, I thought it was going to be easy. It was awful. Yeah, I thought it was going to be hard. It turned out to be really easy. And I always follow that up with, well, what do you think the difference between those two conversations? And ultimately, the difference is the amount of preparation and effort you put into that conversation before you actually engage the individual. Because the one you thought was going to be easy, and I don't really, it's a piece of cake. I've dealt with this, so many times, and I won't worry about it. And it goes sideways on us. And the ones that we think, oh my God, it's going to be so difficult, we put that much more time and effort and energy into preparing for it, managing it appropriately, that we end up having a much better dialogue. And those are to me, one of the things that I think is so important to training and providing skill sets and giving people confidence to have the conversation is also reminding them the confidence lies in slowing down. The confidence lies in actually taking time to prepare. You see all the crap around me in my office here, and you want to win, you got to have a game plan. You have to have an actual strategy if you want to get the kind of result you're looking for, and that holds true with conversations. I mean, hell, there's times you strategize conversations with your partner or your siblings, and I'm sure we all have fun conversations around the holidays with our families coming up that we all get to look forward to, and sometimes we have to mentally even prepare those. So.
And I love how you said that. By the way, thank you for calling all that Steelers stuff crap. You said it, I didn't. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. But even on the family side, like when we talk about strategizing family conversations, sometimes people look at me like horrified. Like, you think I should strategize my family conversations? Yes. Well, I think I should just show up authentically. I agree. But we should strategize how we do that, so we clearly understand the goals that we're looking to achieve, the value of the relationship, the best way to likely proceed, how they're most likely going to challenge us potentially, so we can prepare our responses in advance so we don't pour fuel on the fire. Like, if it's a high impact conversation, personally or professionally, strategizing for those are extremely important. You talked about the classes that you still teach, and you're out there
Yeah.
almost every week still teaching interview and interrogation. And one of the, I think, cool things that you've really shouldered for a long time now is you've done a lot of teaching overseas. So at this point, you've been all around the world to all kinds of places. So I'm curious, as you've traveled quite literally the world teaching interview and interrogation, I imagine that you have run into cultural expectations, laws, expectations, maybe some things that might appear normal to some people around the world, but to us from our background might be somewhere between entertaining and horrifying. So what are some of the things that you've encountered while you've been out traveling overseas teaching that have caused you to take a step back and maybe reassess the situation?
Yeah, I think the biggest things, from a cultural perspective, is the mindset of, I guess, confrontation, I guess, is the best way to phrase it, right? Working through different cultures, some of the commentary that you see in terms of, this is the way we would normally handle this is how we would approach this. Even working and doing exercises and teaching non-confrontational and rapport-based, approaches and everything. And then we work to exercises and go, okay, guys, what did you come up with? And you see how quickly they fall back to, what their comfort level is, and that kind of thing. I've heard things that I was in a class, this is years ago, a class that was supported by the U.S. Department of State, and kind of as an outreach to the host nation. It was their national police force, essentially their version of FBI, as you might say, in a smaller country. And And one of the questions I got, so it's a translated course, so they're all wearing headphones, and so I get a hand raise up, yeah, what's your question? I put my headphones on. I will say the way the question was worded to me, translated to me, was this: Mr. Chris, is it okay if I know that the person that I'm interviewing, if I know they're a craftsman and they need their hands to support their family, is it okay for me to threaten to shoot their hands? Which, of course, the quick reaction is, yeah, that's not non-confrontational. So no, that's not okay. And he quickly interrupted me and said, no. I'm not going to shoot his hands. I'm asking, can I threaten to shoot his hands? Which, once again, I pulled my workbook out and said, yeah, I don't see that chapter here. No, we can't do
that. That's not step 18.
So to find yourself in an environment like that, where understanding the rules of engagement, understanding cultural differences, understanding whether it's criminal code or labor laws, become really, really important. I do get questions often, emailed to me or even shot over on LinkedIn that'll say, hey, I had one recently actually that said, hey, Chris, I'm going to be in the Emirates and I'm going to be doing some interviews in the Emirates. I've never done it in that environment before. Is there anything I need to be aware of? Is there anything I should be mindful of as I approach these investigations that I need to be doing? So I will get inquiries quite often and people checking in. For me, taking the time to understand, again, rules of engagement, everything becoming very important to you culturally. One of the things that I think that I find often too, that's the biggest thing, is the difference in the way we interpret behavior, the differences between cultural behavior norms versus what we know as our culture and our cultural norms and such. I've worked for many years with a program through the Department of State, providing training to investigators at embassies and consular offices around the world. Great program. I love working with it. Why? Because in meeting people from so many different countries and making friends and stuff, whether it's going out to host nation, most of the time in the DC area. But what I always found interesting in teaching groups like that, so if they had 24 students within an academy class, you would have at least 20 countries represented in an academy class. Sometimes you'd have a full 24, countries. But it was always one of those that you'd go, okay, so guys, let's talk about behavior. What do you guys look for? This and that. And I would tell you inevitably, whether it's the Americas, it's African nations, it's EMEA, it's the Gulf, it's Southeast Asia, it's APAC region, it doesn't matter. Everyone says the same things in terms of what they're looking for. We watch their eyes, we're watching their face, we're paying attention to their breathing, we're looking at their hands, their posture. Everyone says the same exact thing. This is where it gets interesting, though, is when you say, okay, you guys are okay, we're talking about eyes, we're looking for eyes. Hey, guys, so guys over here, you say you're looking for eyes. What do you look for? And on the right side of the room, I might have someone say to me, well, we look for good eye contact because good eye contact is bad, right? And then, of course, you get someone on the left side of the room that goes, what the hell are you talking about? Good eye contact is good. No. Good eye contact is a sign of disrespect. No, good eye contact is a sign of respect. When you start to generate this discussion between these different cultural groups and helping us understand, I think anyway, that we can't apply those basic blanket rules to this is what behavior means, because everyone is different culturally. There's so many different things that we have to consider. I think one of the biggest things for me, it goes back to your prep. If you're preparing an important conversation with someone from a different background than your own, it's best to understand the culture. It's best to understand certain things that are perhaps signs of respect and disrespect, what's allowable, what's not. Some of those things I will tell you. So I actually even provided training at the embassy in Kabul, in Afghanistan, on 4 different occasions. So going into the green zone, going into the embassy, I'd be there for about 2 weeks, different agencies that I'd work with providing training. One of the first times I was there, my first visit was in 2012. First class I taught there, And I remember early in the class saying to the group that I was with, here's what I want you to do. And so they were all Afghani nationals that were working for the US government. And I asked the question, I said, I want you guys to shut your workbooks for a few minutes here. It is time for teacher to become student. I want you guys to teach me about your culture. Yes, I can read things online. Yes, I can go through notes that are provided me by the State Department. You live it, you experience it. I want you to teach me about your culture. And I said to them, I'm going to be asking you some questions. Some of the questions might sound silly, right? But there's a reason I'm asking, and it's because I don't know the answer. And I want the correct answer. I don't want to make assumptions. I don't want to guess. And some of the questions were quite simple as, do you shake hands? And if you do, how do you? Would you shake the hand of a woman? The group was all men, happened to be all men, and that first time that I was there. How would you sit if you had to have to interview a woman? How would you sit if you were with a man? And there are just a lot of things that you became important for me to understand. If I'm going to teach a class about communication, I need to understand certain things about their culture, but who best to get it from but the people that live in that culture, right? As opposed to just relying on text and doing some research online, which is quite valuable, but at the same time, take the time to ask questions and you'd be shocked at what you can learn and that much more accurate than what our assumptions might be. But from a behavior perspective, I always found that was quite interesting. The fact that we all look for the same things, but we interpret it so differently, based upon, what our cultural norms are. There's so many different cultures to think about, not just nationality culture, but ethnic and, socioeconomic and, racial culture. There's so many different, that you'd have to consider, when it comes to those environments. One of the things that I guess I've been blessed with in a way is the ability to travel, to be open-minded to all the different cultures and different things that you get exposed to. I was just in Korea a week ago, providing training in Korea. And I will tell you that when it came to teaching there, the first time that I was there a year ago, I was prepared ahead of time that culturally, it would be a bit disrespectful to challenge someone in a position of authority, so they may not ask you many questions. And you know how engaging you want a training class to be, but if it's culturally disrespectful to challenge or question in any way,
you get done 2 hours early. You get your time back.
Right. But I will say that when I walked away from the first time I was in Korea, I remember walking away from the class thinking to myself, that might have been one of the hardest weeks of training I've ever been through. Not only language barrier, but some of the cultural things that made it difficult to, not necessarily to teach. They certainly understood the lessons, you could tell that, but to have open engagement and an active sort of learning environment as opposed to more of a lecture learning environment, so.
As you went back, were there any lessons from that first trip that you were able to use to kind of crack them open a little bit the second time? I know it's probably a different group the second time, but learning from the experience to try to help people feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, for sure. And what ended up happening, so it was a different group that I was working with, but knowing that what I ended up doing was I created an environment right from the beginning that they saw that it was welcome to participate, welcome to ask and to that sort of thing, as opposed to kind of drawing them in later when it didn't have the impact that I was wanting, because we've already established that so let's establish this is going to be a collaborative few days that we're going to be spending together right away. And so that did help, for sure. So it was much, much, much better, but there's a lot of different challenges that go along with that. And even the conversations, as you say, we think about our prep, the importance of prep, but creating connections, creating rapport, being able to ask questions in an appropriate way. There's so many different things to consider in environments like that, particularly when I might be coming to teach a concept that they are a little bit unfamiliar with. Everyone understands the importance or recognizes what rapport is. I think we'll get that, but from a strategic perspective, or why it's so important. Some cultures it's get to the point. And so why I don't care about his family or about the weekend or about anything else. I want to get to the point and talk to him about why I'm there. Which again, culturally that could be, an important way to get respect, but at the same time, is it inviting the types of responses and opening the path to communication that you're looking for or not? So there's different concepts that we end up spending some time with to kind of overcome some of the cultural, awareness and differences that we share and bring. And I think that's the biggest thing here is recognizing, instead of focusing on the differences, recognizing that they're there and how can we change them to bring things closer together between the two parties and stuff. But
that's a great point. Recognizing the differences right up front. I think there is, I've had the opportunity to do some stuff overseas, certainly not as much as you have. There is the universality of the human experience to a fairly large degree. As human beings, we experience a lot of the same emotions. We need a lot of the same things, but culturally, how that applies can be different, and the nuances can be different, and the focus areas can be different, and all of those things. So to recognize the differences up front can be extremely powerful. That's also true in interview and interrogation. That's also true in difficult conversations. You and I could probably both rattle on about examples where sometime in early stages of investigative interviews, we owned up to things that we might not know, we might not have experience with, we might not understand, because A, it's true and they know it. So there's no reason in hiding from it. And B, showing that vulnerability helps them be vulnerable with us, helps them be more transparent with us, and then helps them take on that role of educator. And as soon as somebody takes on the role of educator in a conversation, usually their guard goes down. And when their guard goes down, they tend to share more information. So recognizing those differences up front can make a huge difference. You spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hours in front of classrooms teaching people at this point in your career. Neither one of us, I think, are math all-stars. We don't have to go back and try to do the math, but it's been a long time. As you have learned to connect with audiences, which is really a lot about what we're talking about. It can be domestic or overseas. You and I have been in rooms together, and I don't want to call out any career path specifically, but with investigators from a certain speciality that just don't like to talk, don't like to open up, don't laugh at jokes. They're a little bit more rigid and formal. We've been in rooms together with people that have essentially been on a college campus together for 12 weeks, and there are no rules anymore. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is off limits. We can make whatever jokes we want to make. So as you have learned to adapt your style to maximize the audience experience, what have been some of the most important things for you to be alert to, and then some of the most important adjustments for you to be aware enough to make?
I think it's a good question. One of the things that when I committed to doing this over 25 years ago now, I think, in terms of teaching and that kind of thing, was I made a commitment to myself that I'm not going to be the guy behind the lecture that is just boring as hell, that I can't wait until the next break is. So I made a commitment to myself that I'm not going to be that guy, right? And so who do I want to be? How do I need, what do I need to do to be able to connect? And I think one of the things that I think was always most important to me to create and find ways to connect is be authentic, be genuine, be yourself. And if I have an ability to show myself to you, then you start to feel a little more connected to me because you feel like you know me. Now you're more connected to me. And now there's perhaps a greater willingness to be, to listen to what my messaging is, or listen to, what we're going to be talking about, in terms of training. Reading the room is important. I've never been one to put people on the spot. I don't like that kind of approach. Everyone has a little different approach. I certainly don't have any problems, calling out on someone and getting people active, but I don't like putting people on the spot. So finding those volunteers early becomes important, engaging early, recognizing, when you have people that are fully engaged in the training, whether it be note taking or the way they pay attention, the way they're asking questions, the way they communicate, during group sessions, the way they're communicating on breaks and other things like this become very valuable, to recognize that. But then in those moments when you're seeing someone who's maybe not so engaged, is taking those moments during breaks or during group projects to actually directly one-on-one engage them and, hey, how you doing? Today, hey, what's going on? And maybe creating a connection that way and being able to recognize that there might be something holding them back. What could that be to open those gates of curiosity to them? And maybe it's just saying hi to them. Maybe it is on a break going, hey, noticed earlier, so hey, yeah, what's that all about? And again, creating a different level of comfort. It is all about trust, right? Anything that we're doing, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or we're in this group training setting, it's about trust. I trust that I can open up and say something here in class or ask a question and not be ridiculed for my question. Right. So it all falls back to trust and relationships and everything. And then there's always challenges that go along with it. Obviously, not everyone's going to like me. I get that. I bought into that many years ago. That's that's going to be the case, right? But I always felt like if I was willing to reveal a little bit about myself and help you as an audience feel a little more comfortable with me, then that would actually open those lines of communication much better, and help facilitate training and help facilitate those sorts of conversations that go along creating classes in that manner. But I don't know.
All good. Great recognition. It's not about us. It's about them. And how do we create the experience they need? And I'm sure, like you, I get asked about reading the room a lot, and there is a lot of validity to it. But you and I can also probably recount tons of stories where the person who looked disinterested, that's actually their interested face. And they're the ones that have the great question or the great feedback, or they're the first ones to come up and say, come do this for my company. And if you were just reading the room, you look at that person and say, well, they hate me and everything I'm saying. So really just kind of focusing around them and being open to needing to adapt along the way is a great way to do it. Yeah, I can't thank you enough for everything that you shared today, man. You may or may not recall, but you were the first interrogation teacher I ever had.
Yeah.
Waltham, Massachusetts. And if I recall correctly, which I do, to be honest, that session was like 5 minutes away from where one of my closest friends lived. Yep. And I was living in Connecticut at the time, so I drove up. And needless to say, my buddy Aaron and I hit it hard the night before. So I believe I was the last person to walk in. And the last seat that was available in the whole room was front and center, like middle front row. It was one of those, like there were 3 people per table and there was a pitcher of water on the table. I walk in, I sit down, the pitcher was in front of the dude to the left. I picked up the pitcher, I put it down in front of me, and I just looked at him like, this is mine.
Right.
And really my first concern right away was, how am I going to make it through today? But within, I don't know, man, maybe 15 minutes of listening to you talk, I knew that this was going to be something that I needed. And I think within about 2 hours of listening to you talk, I realized my girlfriend was cheating on me, which is a story for another day. But to some large degree, what I do now is your fault. So that was the first class I ever took was with you. And I saw you again a couple of months after, and you introduced me to Brett, and it was all kind of downhill from there. And then once we started working together, you were the first person I went on the road with to San Francisco. You picked me up at the airport in the sexiest lime green Mazda minivan I'd ever seen in my entire life. And we got to cruise around San Francisco in that for a couple of days. But all that is to say, man, I really appreciate the work that you do. Thank you for the time that you put into me, especially early in my career. I really appreciate it. It's great to be back in touch. Thank you for sharing not just the stories and the experience, but the nuances of why it's important, how to do it, and how we can apply it. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and it's always great to catch up. I miss our time together for sure. If I remember correctly, I think I might have been the one who gave your official sign off as well, and I think I made you have a couple too many drinks the night before, so to see if you can actually power through. Feeling a little salty the next morning, if I remember correctly, but
That story checks out, I believe.
yeah. Yeah, we had some great times, and I'm really happy for your success and the things that you've been doing, on your own. It's really great for you and your family, and always lifelong friend. And I things that will always keep us, connected outside of a love for sport, and just being able to sit down and talk and everything, but it's also the love of communication, and you and I just it is, when we were able to catch up over a conference, and I don't know how long it'd been since we actually seen each other, maybe at least a couple years.
Yeah.
But to actually just pick up the conversation like it was just last weekend that we saw each other, previous is always great. So, congratulations to you, and all the best to you. And again, thanks for having me on. I always love having conversations, and getting people to think through what's the best way to just sit down and have a difficult conversation. And there's so many ways to approach it. But the best way is approach with a certain level of humility and create a human connection with someone, even if it is a tough conversation. So
You got it, man. Have a game plan.
yeah.
Well, I appreciate it, brother. It's great to see you. I know you got a bunch to do today. Thank you so much for carving out the time. Let's not make it so many years before we're sitting at the same table again.
Absolutely, man.
All right, man. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Be good.
Chris, thanks for a great conversation, man. It's great to catch up. It's great to see you again. I'm already looking forward to the next time. I appreciate everything that you've done for me in my career, and thank you for everything that you've shared today. I really appreciate it. I love how you kept going back to that thought that accountability is a vulnerable process. It's super important for us all to understand and apply, not just in our investigations or business communications, but in our personal life as well. It was fun to revisit that case, break it down, and kind of relive what we went through, and shout out some of the great little things that you did in order to bring that confession to light. Great work. I appreciate you walking through us with that. I thought it was really cool how you talked about the importance of the teacher being the student, especially in the international programs that you've done, but really anytime we find ourselves in a novel environment. When it comes to building rapport, recognizing differences can be so helpful. And I loved your thought on transparency. A lot of times we have to show people who we are so they will show us who they are. Real powerful stuff, man. I appreciate it. Thank you again. It was great to catch up and spend the hour together. Thank you to all of you that listened to the conversation. I truly appreciate it. Please, while you're here, again, take a second, just like the show, share it, subscribe to it. We really appreciate all your support. Thank you. And you can go to the show notes before you go and check out the links to our sponsors. That's where you can find humantel.com. You can enter the code in TWASIve25 for 25% off the scientifically backed best in class training to understand what people are likely thinking and feeling by recognizing shifts in their facial expression and nonverbal communication. You can also go to certifiedinterviewer.com if you're a professional interviewer, and that's where you can learn more about the International Association of Interviewers and what that relationship could mean for you. It's also where you can get all your questions answered for the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation, what it can mean for your career moving forward. You can also head over to inquasive.com to learn more about the customized programs our clients ask us to facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, and HR teams to teach them how to apply the strategic observation and persuasive communication skills necessary to unlock the hidden confessions in all of their high value conversations. Thank you for coming back week after week. We truly appreciate it. Please stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.